We basically live our entire lives in the cloud, right? Our work, our memories, the whole digital economy, it all runs on this invisible infrastructure. But what happens when that cloud, which is made of very real, very physical stuff, slams head-on into a geopolitical reality it just can't compute? What happens when the spreadsheets used to build it meet the actual map of a conflict zone? Okay, let's get into it.
Look, this isn't some hypothetical. This is the shocking question being asked right now by major outlets like the Financial Times. And it's because the unthinkable actually happened. It's a brutal reminder that the cloud isn't some mystical thing floating in the sky. Nope, it's concrete. It's silicon. It's miles of fiber optic cables sitting in a very specific place on the ground, and as it turns out, some of those places are way more dangerous than others.
So, what exactly went down? Well, the reason we're even having this conversation is because of a series of pretty startling events that brought our digital world crashing down to Earth, literally.
So according to outlets like The Register, news started breaking about drone strikes targeting major cloud facilities. Now, the Iranian Fars news agency, which is aligned with their government, came out and claimed these attacks on Amazon Web Services centers in Dubai and Bahrain were totally deliberate. They said it was a strategic move to, poke the system and see just how dependent the rest of the world is on these very specific, very physical buildings.
And that brings us right back to that fundamental question from the Financial Times. Why on earth would you build the backbone of the entire digital world in one of the most volatile regions on the planet? Well, the answer, as it almost always is, really just comes down to money.
And you have to understand the scale we're talking about here. It's insane. Tech giants are in this all-out sprint, pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into building the infrastructure for the AI revolution. And when you're spending that kind of cash, saving even a single percentage point is a huge, huge number.
And that's exactly what made the Gulf look so good on paper. As the Financial Times pointed out, these nations were offering a golden ticket. We're talking massive subsidies, unbelievably cheap energy, a way to get around all the political headaches of building new power grids back home, and hey, it's a great central spot for all those undersea cables. On a spreadsheet, it looked like an absolute genius move.
But this is the exact moment where those perfect financial models just slam right into geopolitical reality. The logic that works on a spreadsheet doesn't always work on a map, especially when that map is covered in red flags.
In fact, critics, like the analysts over at Pluvius AI, they have a much harsher name for this kind of thinking. They call it a financially driven suicide. And wow, that's a powerful phrase because it gets right to the heart of this massive, unpriced risk that everyone just seemed to ignore.
So let's just break that down for a second. Financially driven suicide is basically when you're so focused on the immediate financial wins, the cheap power, the big subsidies, that you become completely blind to the obvious long-term security dangers. It's choosing the cheap and easy path today, even if it leads directly to a catastrophic failure tomorrow.
And this just nails the fundamental truth that got missed. You can have the best encryption in the world, the most sophisticated software security money can buy. But a missile does not care. It physically deletes the servers. All your digital security is absolutely meaningless if the hardware it runs on has just been turned into a pile of smoking rubble.
This whole incident, it really shines a light on a much deeper, more systemic problem in our digital world. This isn't just about one data center being in a bad spot. It's about all of us being way too reliant on just a handful of giant providers.
There's actually a term for this that thinkers like Douglas Rushkoff and the folks at Pluvius AI have been using: cloud feudalism. And the idea is pretty simple. We've stopped owning our digital homes and have all become tenants, just renting space from a few incredibly powerful digital landlords.
This table really breaks the metaphor down perfectly, doesn't it? The big cloud providers like AWS, they're the landlords. Businesses all over the world, we're the tenants, paying our rent every month. And what happens if you decide you want to leave and take your stuff, your data, with you? Wham! You get hit with a massive exit toll, which the industry likes to call data egress fees. You're basically locked in.
And this is where that whole shared responsibility model that AWS loves to talk about just completely falls apart, right? They tell you you're responsible for security in the cloud. But what happens when the cloud itself, the actual building full of servers, is vaporized? Well, that responsibility is squarely on the landlord, but guess who pays the price? The tenant whose entire business just went up in smoke.
So this is the big question, right? What now? This event is forcing a massive reality check across the entire tech industry, and it looks like the path forward really splits into two totally different ways of thinking.
On one side, we can just keep doing what we're doing, stay dependent on these centralized giants, and just kind of accept the risk of having a single point of failure because, well, it's easy and it looks cheaper on the surface. But on the other side, there's a growing push for something called multi-cloud sovereignty. And that's a strategy that's all about diversification and resilience, making sure no single company and no single geopolitical mess can just wipe your entire operation off the map.
And this is really the key takeaway for every single business leader, every CTO out there. It's a tough pill to swallow, but it's crucial. If your whole future, your entire AI roadmap, hinges on a single physical dot on a map that can be deleted by a cheap drone, you don't have a strategy, you have a target.
Which leaves us with one last pretty sobering question to think about. In a world where the very foundation of our digital lives can be physically erased by an explosion in a desert, we really have to ask ourselves, who is actually in control of our digital future?